Chapter 13 of The Alps, the Danube, and the Near East. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Betty B. From Prague to Vienna. I have come from the capital of Czechoslovakia to the capital of the Austrian Republic. From one of the newly christened national capitals of Europe to one that was gray-haired and wrinkled when our own city of Washington was laid out along the Potomac. The first was a city when William the Conqueror landed in England, and the second was a center of trade when the Crusaders floated down the Danube on their way to rescue Jerusalem. It was only 180 years after Christ that my old friend, the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, died in the Roman fortress on the site of Vienna, leaving the Meditations we all love to read. And here Charlemagne built a stronghold after he had driven out the Asiatic tribes that had set up an empire on the Danube. It was in the 8th century that he established the Margravate of Austria, which later on succumbed to the Hungarians. During the Crusades, Vienna began to build up its trade with the East, and from that time to this it has been the chief mart of the Danube, that great water highway between Europe and Asia. On my way to Vienna, I came through some of the lands that Austria lost by the Treaty of Saint-Germain, which the Allied powers drew up for her signature. I crossed Bohemia, Moravia, and Slovakia via the Danube. The city is so much the child of that mighty river that I did not want to reach it by railway, so I took a train at Prague and rode for the better part of a day to Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia. There I boarded an Austrian steamer and came upstream, fighting the current, to where I am now. Along the way I was surprised at the natural wealth I saw in Moravia. The province is bigger than Massachusetts and has as many people as Baltimore and Philadelphia combined. Much of it is beautifully rolling and the hills are covered with forests. We passed numerous sawmills and at the stations found lumber stacked up for shipment. There were mountains of pulpwood ready for the market and truckloads of telegraph and telephone poles going out of the country. The forests seemed to be well cared for, and I saw no underbrush anywhere. Farther south the soil was richer. On both sides of the railroad fields of wheat, oats, and grass waved to and fro under the wind, and I could see nothing but crops reaching on to the horizon. The scenes reminded me of the words of the psalmist. The valleys also are covered over with corn. They shout for joy, they also sing. Here all the trees that line every road, ditch, and creek are fruit-bearing. The Moravian villages looked prosperous, and the farmers must be rich. Most of the houses were roofed with slate, and their stuccoed walls had been recently whitewashed. There were industrial centers and towns at every few miles. I spent some time at Brno, the capital, which has more than 200,000 inhabitants, and is a manufacturing town in the heart of a farming region. It is noted for its textiles and used to be called the Manchester of Austria. Brno was once known as Brunn, and its rechristening indicates the new status of things in this part of Europe. As soon as the Czechs won their nationality, they proceeded to sow place names in their own language over the new nation. Pilsen, still famous for its beer, has become Pilsen. Pressburg is now Bratislava, after one of the early rulers of Bohemia. Marienbad one can scarcely recognize as Mariansky Lázny, while it would seem that Carlsbad would never be so popular as a health resort with such a tongue-twisting designation as Karlovy Vary. In Slovakia one does not notice so much enthusiasm for the Czechs as in Moravia and Bohemia. The Slovaks are another branch of the Slavic people, not nearly so progressive as the Czechs, whom they call the Prussians of the Slavs. The people of Prague, on the other hand, seem to regard their more backward countrymen much as the New Yorker does the citizens of Arizona and New Mexico. To them, Slovakia is a kind of wild and woolly East. The Slovaks explain their high percentage of illiteracy by saying that rather than learn to read and write the Magyar tongue, which the Hungarians tried to force upon them, they went without learning at all. The Slovaks and the Czechs use a closely allied speech so that it is easy for them to understand each other. Slovakia is a mountainous and thinly populated region with fertile valleys separated by ridges sloping toward the Danube. I found it a land of small farms, forests, and villages, rather than one of cities, mills, and shops. I noticed that the women worked hard, and saw a number of them bent double under great loads of long poles, which were strapped to their backs. I was struck with the honest faces of the people. Indeed, I have been told that the Slovak's peasant's honesty is proverbial, and that his home bank will lend him money even to go to America to seek his fortune. The money lenders know that either he or his family will surely pay the debt. I spent the night in Bratislava at a good hotel, where my room cost me $1.25, and before taking my steamer next morning I drove through the cobblestone streets in a one-horse carriage. Bratislava was once the capital of Hungary, and it was here that the Habsburgs were crowned kings. On the tower of the old Coronation Church, which dates back to the 13th century, there is still a gilded Hungarian royal crown. The town was known as Pressburg to the Austrians and Pozsony to the Hungarians. Its population numbers 100,000, mostly Slovaks and Hungarians. The steamer that brought us from Bratislava up to Vienna was one of 4 boats plying between Rušak, Bulgaria, past Belgrade to the Austrian capital. The steamship company was originally known as the Monarch Line, and when they were planned, the 4 boats were to be named after great rulers of the time: Kaiser Wilhelm, Francis Joseph, Ferdinand of Bulgaria, and Mohammed V, Sultan of Turkey. The 2 boats built during the World War were named respectively Franz Joseph and Wilhelm, but after the Treaty of Peace it was decided to throw down the monarchs and put up the planets, as stars that could not be affected by the wars of the future. Wilhelm and Franz Joseph became Jupiter and Saturn, and the 2 boats that were added later were christened Neptune and Helios. I came up on Helios, which was about the only sun we had for much of the way. It rained now and then, but just as we crossed the boundary of Austria and Czechoslovakia, a mighty rainbow appeared spanning the river that separates the 2 countries. One end of the bow rested in Czechoslovakia and the other in Austria, and the glorious arch of splendid hues seemed like the bow in the clouds God sent up for Noah, the token of a covenant that no more should the deluge of war descend upon the nations so bound together. And yet I fear that the peace of the present is one of armed truce rather than of brotherly love, for as I went on toward Vienna I frequently saw evidence of hatred on the part of the Czechs and the Slovaks for their former masters. On my way to the boat in Bratislava I passed a great pedestal without a statue, and was told that there formerly stood the fine bronze figure of the old Habsburg Empress Maria Theresa. Some 20-odd miles west of Bratislava, the March River flows into the Danube beneath the shadow of a towering rock. This is one of the great divides of human history. Southeast are the plains of Hungary. Southwest, across the Danube, is Austria. Northwest stretch the forests and hills of Bohemia. Northeast lie the little valleys of Slovakia. All 4 of the racial streams represented in these different regions, Czechs, Germans, Slovaks, and Magyars, were formerly subjects of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In 1896 the Hungarians raised on the rock a beautiful shaft to commemorate the 1,000 years that the Magyars had held here an outpost of Western civilization. Now the column lies in ruins, shattered doubtless by some Slovak with hatred of his ancient masters in his heart. Such acts of vandalism keep antagonisms alive and breed more bitterness in the vanquished. End of chapter 13.